Good morning. Hope you're having a great Friday. This is our first leadership visit of our new three-part series, and we're really going to have fun today. Hear from you all and have a chance to let y'all connect with each other. I really am. I'm just here to say hello and hang out, and I'm going to immediately turn the floor over to Melody and Emily, who are our leadership visit and teaching guides for this morning. I hope you already know them. Melody, you've probably met. She is from Greene County, does a lot of leadership work. Emily, who I hope you know, but just in case you don't, she is in Sumner County. And actually, I was going to say new, but honestly, you're probably past 2 years. You're like way into our experience category, Both of them actually come to us with actually graduate work in the area of leadership and communications. And so we're just excited to have them bring their passion and their skills to this topic and master gardeners. So Emily, Melody, take it away.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is a lot of fun and very exciting to see all these master gardener leaders from across the state. So I am going to get us started this morning. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. So we're going to be talking about the introverted and extroverted leader. And why I chose this topic, I thought we could all identify with being at least, more introverted or more extroverted. And we're noticing a trend, or at least I am, of people who are reluctant to take on leadership roles. And I wanted to shine a light on how very different personality types can both be excellent leaders if we create the right opportunities for them to succeed. So some introverts do avoid taking on leadership roles because they potentially don't want to be the center of attention. They anticipate a negative experience working with others, so they avoid it. Or they struggle with the idea of promoting themselves in front of others. But this is just because they haven't found their superpower as an introverted leader. And we can encourage both introverts and extroverts in our groups to be leaders if we offer them the right opportunities. So that is what we are going to get into today. And then towards the end of my presentation, we are going to talk about some other leadership styles and leadership theory as well. So if you would take a moment, because I'm very curious to see, I have a theory. If you would take a moment to type into the chat whether you identify as an introvert or an extrovert. Let's see if I can put this. There we go, so I can see. I thought so. I see a lot of introverts. And I had a theory that our master gardeners were a lot of introverts. And so this is very interesting for me. Thank you for taking a moment to share that. So if you are not sure, which most people are sure, but I have some leading questions on the next couple of slides, just a few questions. And if you answer yes to most of them, you are probably either an introvert or an extrovert. So while you guys are going ahead and reading these questions, I'm going to read you some fun facts about extroverts. We'll start there. So extroverts respond well to rewards. One theory that explains this is that dopamine responsivity encourages extroverts to reach for rewards. If you often use social media, chances are you're likely an extrovert. Those who spend more than 2 hours a day on social media are seen as more extroverted by both themselves and others. And extroverts are more likely to use figurative language and abstractions when communicating, whereas introverts are more likely to rely on facts when communicating their point. So if you answered mostly yes to these questions, chances are you are more extroverted. So let's move on to our introverts. Same thing, answer mostly yes, you're probably an introvert. So introverts are more likely to be male than female. Introverts are more sensitive to punishment than extroverts are. And researchers have found that introverts have a higher blood flow to their frontal lobe than extroverts do. And this is the part of the brain that helps you remember things, solve problems, and plan ahead. So if you probably answered yes on probably both screens to at least a couple questions, and that's pretty normal. Most of the population is what is called ambiverted, which means a little bit of both to most degrees. Being extremely introverted or extremely extroverted is a pretty small percentage of the population. But for our purposes today, choose the one that you default to more, the one that you identify with more. And a fun fact about ambiverts, they have the highest IQ out of all the personality types. So extroversion and introversion were popularized by Carl Jung, who was a Swiss psychoanalyst. You may have heard of him in 1921. For those of you that are not familiar with Carl Jung, he studied under the infamous / famous Sigmund Freud and was going to be the heir to Freud's legacy. But due to differences in personalities and theory, they did end up parting ways. So he's famous for a few things. One is his analytical psychology, which focuses on the relationship between the individual's unconscious mind and the greater collective's unconscious understanding. So many of you may have heard the term the collective unconscious. He was very interested in dreams as well. His Jungian archetypes, and the archetypes are different roles each of us inhabit throughout our psychological experience. His four main ones were the persona, the shadow, the animus, and the self, and also his theories of introversion and extroversion. So he believed that extroverts and introverts were different because it's about where they direct their energy. So extroverts tend to send their attention in an outward direction. They're energized by interaction with the outer world of people and things. And introverts are more energized when reflecting on concepts and ideas in their inner world. So their attention is drawn in a more inward direction. So according to the Myers-Briggs Company, we'll talk about that here in a second, we're about even. The United States is 51% introverted and 49% extroverted. Some of you have probably taken the Myers-Briggs type indicator before, which is the personality assessment. And if you know your Myers-Briggs type, if you wouldn't mind typing it in the chat, I would love to see what it is. But we're going to talk a little bit more about Myers-Briggs in a second. So at our leadership session that we're going to be doing in October, we're going to be diving, oh, look, a lot of people know, this is great, a little bit more into the Myers-Briggs. And Melody is going to drop a link in the chat for a free version of the Myers-Briggs type assessment. We would love if you would take it before our statewide leadership session. And it might even be a good idea for you guys to take it again to see if anything has changed since the last time you took it. I've taken it a few times in my life and it's always stayed really static. But my partner at work has said his has changed multiple times as he's aged. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Myers-Briggs type assessment, so it was developed by Catherine Cook Briggs and her daughter Isabel Briggs Myers in the mid-20th century. And World War II had a huge influence on the project. Isabel Myers believed that if people understood each other better, that they'd work together better, and that there'd be less conflict, and that the post-war world could be a better place. So she spent the next 20 years developing the instrument and the theory. The first one was published in 1962. And today the Myers-Briggs Company continues to follow Myers' guiding principle that understanding and valuing personality differences can change the world for the better. And it's currently used by 88% of Fortune 500 companies in 115 countries, which is really interesting. So the Myers-Briggs assessment takes several things into consideration. We're just going to dive into introverts and extroverts today. But there is also whether you are a sensing or intuitive type person, a feeling or thinking type, or judging or perceiving. So we're just going to kick off our kind of, Myers-Briggs leadership here with just introverted and extroverted. So let's talk about our extroverted leaders first. So some qualities of our extroverted leaders: they often have large networks. They can easily make social connections that are beneficial for their organization and team. They are much more comfortable with promoting themselves and their ideas and their organizations than introverts are, and are energized by collaborative work, by working with other people. They can also make quick decisions and tend to trust their own decisions without lengthy consideration. And it makes them well suited for leadership roles that require quick thinking and action. And they are also bigger risk takers than introverts. And we know that a certain amount of healthy risk taking is definitely a good thing. So several studies were done that showed that extroverted people were more comfortable taking risks, including social, educational, and vocational risks. And this is because they're energized by engaging with the outside world. And it's not that introverts don't take risks, it's that they take much more calculated risks than extroverts do. And our introverted leaders. So introverts, as we know, tend to become drained by prolonged social interactions, but they can be energized by meaningful relationships and meaningful interactions. So introverts are the ideal leaders of small groups where they can develop intimate relationships with others and express their ideas one-on-one. For our purposes, that would be our committee leaders and our project leaders. Introverts make valuable leaders in these types of settings because they can develop a relationship with their followers based on individual attention and trust. And they are also excellent listeners and more likely to encourage the innovation and creativity of others. Introverts are also more thoughtful and careful decision makers. They take the time to consider multiple perspectives and plan ahead as they are more inward focused. They tend to be more patient and they tend to think things through before acting. So introverted leaders can be a huge asset when making a difficult or a weighty decision. And this also makes them well suited for these roles that require careful consideration and planning. And introverts can be excellent facilitators. I'm sure it strikes fear into the heart of many of our introverts, and even me too as an extrovert, to think about, public speaking sometimes in these large networking events. But introverts can be excellent facilitators. So in a facilitation situation, an introvert can control the environment as far as lighting, setup, and mood, as well as controlling the schedule and kind of match things with their inner world a little bit more to make them more comfortable. And they can also put a lot of the energy on others as far as they can encourage group discussion, allowing other members to learn from each other and ask a lot of open-ended questions and let others do the talking so they don't become so drained in these social interactions, in these large group events. Okay, so what do both leaders have in common? Whether introverted or extroverted, all leaders need to promote a unified vision for their team. So whether that means for their organization, their project group, their committee, a vision for the overarching themes of an event or an educational teaching, but they do go about this in a different way. Extroverts are better at being a rallying force and rallying their team around a unified vision, where introverts may be more likely to lead by example. And all leaders need to know how to collaborate with others. Introverts in collaborative situations are good listeners, as we know, so they can help their followers plan. They can help their followers be proactive, and they can help them come up with their best ideas and are more likely to promote the ideas of others, where extroverts are more likely to promote their own ideas and be intimidated by the ideas of others. And finally, all leaders need to be able to get the best out of their followers. One of these things would be encouragement. So I was thinking about my own Master Gardener group, and I was thinking about my extroverted master gardeners, when they win an award, they want to stop the entire meeting and they want to stand up and say, you know, our project group won this award, and they want everyone to see, and they're so proud, and they want, you know, everyone to rally around them. But my more introverted master gardeners will say, you know, say they really liked a presentation, or somebody that had lead a teaching, they would say, can I please have their email? I want to send them a special message. Or, you know, some of them still write letters and things like that. So showing encouragement can just look different from an introverted and an extroverted standpoint. So for this next part, I had a lot of fun putting this together. I thought we could go over a few other leadership styles and leadership theory. So this may help you identify these types of leaders in your Master Gardener group, or understand why you look up to certain leaders in your community or just in general. And maybe you identify with being one of these types of leaders. So the first leadership style I want to talk about is the charismatic leader. So the word charisma is derived from the ancient Greek meaning divine gift. And charisma can be hard to define, but we know it when we see it. We usually think of charm, presence, a really captivating personality. So charismatic leaders can evoke strong loyalty in their followers. And just because they are effective does not mean they are benevolent. So over here on the right, we have two examples of charismatic leaders. Well, both who had a strong vision and powerful personalities and were strongly influential. So of course we have Martin Luther King Jr. And then if you do not recognize this fellow on the right, that is David Koresh, who was the charismatic cult leader of the Branch Davidians. And his leadership resulted in a 51-day siege on the cult compound in Waco in 1993 that killed 84 Branch Davidians and 4 federal agents. So I think it's important when we identify our charismatic leaders to examine their motivations as well. Are they benevolent or are they not benevolent? Just because a charismatic leader is effective does not mean they have everybody's best interests in mind. And I just wanted to briefly talk about one of the charismatic leaders I have in my Master Gardener group. So he's a larger than life personality. He has a lot of people that really love and admire him. He's written a book. He's the president of several important societies. And he told me this story that cracked me up. He went down to Florida with his wife for the first time for the whole winter. And he's not the kind of guy that can sit around. So he said, well, I got in with this Master Gardener group in Florida, and I would go to their greenhouse where they were, you know, growing things for their plant sale. And I would hang out with them. Oh, they loved him. They were so sad when he left. He had the best time. So you guys may have one of those in your groups as well. And luckily this man is a very benevolent man. He has a large heart for service, but you know a charismatic leader when you see them. So the next type of leadership I'd like to discuss is the autocratic leader. And many of us may be going, oh, I had a boss that was like that, and it was not the best. So they are categorized by being authoritarian, structured, and efficient, with clearly defined rules and processes. So Napoleon Bonaparte is our example here, who led a huge army and amassed a giant empire without sharing his ideas with anyone. We see this leadership style often in the military. And I thought a surgeon was a really good example of this as well, because there's no one on the bottom that is, you know, sending their ideas to the surgeon. The surgeon has to make quick decisions. Everything has to be efficient. Everybody has to listen to him in order for the surgery to be successful. But this leadership style is effective in some situations. So in high pressure situations where the lines of communication need to be very direct and decisions need to be made quickly, and where efficiency is absolutely necessary. So I think this style of leadership, for our purposes, would be helpful in a situation where laissez-faire leadership has everything's kind of fallen to the wayside, and there's little direction, and someone kind of needs to come in and get things back on track. I think that could be effective. And in a Master Gardener situation, there's plenty of cons to autocratic leadership, but for our purposes, this type of leadership does limit creativity, and folks can become dependent on their autocratic leader. And a quote from Napoleon Bonaparte that I think really sets him apart as an autocratic leader is, "If you want a thing done well, do it yourself." Okay. So the next theory we're going to talk about is transformational leadership theory. Our example here is Nelson Mandela. So the transformational leader provides intellectual stimulation for his followers or her followers, which means encouraging them to think outside the box and be innovative. Individual consideration, which means attending to each follower's individual needs. This is a follower-centered leader. Nelson Mandela is a good example of this because he certainly understood his people and their desire for freedom from years of segregation and discrimination. Inspirational motivation is part of this as well, to be committed to a vision and to inspire and motivate others into a sense of purpose. So even as a young man, Mandela had the vision to end the apartheid system in his country. He led a campaign of peaceful, nonviolent defiance against the South African government and its unfair discrimination against his people. And ideal influence is characterized by being an exemplary role model. And charisma a lot of times will play into this idealized influence part. And Nelson Mandela particularly was known as a role model for his strong moral conviction, personal example, and self-sacrifice. And something he said that I think really embodies this transformational leadership for him is lead from the back and let others believe that they are in front. And then our last example of leadership is the servant leader. So Robert K. Greenleaf coined the term servant leadership in his 1970 essay, The Servant as Leader, and he recognized that organizations as well as individuals can be servant leaders. So 10 important qualities of servant leaders. I'm not going to read all of those to you, but I do want to clarify a few things. Number 5, you see the word persuasion there, and it's kind of like, ooh, you know, when talking about servant leadership, that may seem a little strange, but that means reliance on convincing others based on the merits of arguments rather than on coercion or manipulation or force, which makes a lot of sense. Conceptualization means an ability to think beyond day-to-day realities and dream big. And foresight are efforts to understand lessons from the past, the realities of the present, and the likely consequences of a decision for the future. And our example of the servant leader is, of course, you all, master gardeners. And according to the USDA, there are 84,000 other servant leaders, master gardeners, serving across the country right now. And you guys are making the world a better place one day at a time. So I'm going to end my talk today with a quote from Robert K. Greenleaf that I think really summarizes our goal in uplifting our communities through our service as master gardeners. And he's referencing those that we serve in this quote. Do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? And what is the effect on the least privileged of society? Will they benefit or at least not be further deprived? So here is my contact information. I am here in Sumner County. I am in the northwest part of the central region. My master gardeners are the Sumner County Master Gardener Association. So please feel free to reach out to me at any time. And I appreciate getting to be here with you guys today.
Well, Emily has laid a fantastic foundation to segue into what I'm going to conclude our visit with this morning. And we're basically going to take all the concepts and themes that Emily just described and kind of relate that to organizational structure, okay, and succession planning. This is something that I've spent a lot of time on with my group, as well as some of your individual groups. But since COVID, we've not really spent a lot of time on some of these concepts, some of this facilitation. So I think it warrants a revisit to succession planning and how we just think about our local group structure, how we can incorporate the extroversion, the introversion, just determining our individual style of leadership and integrating that into our leadership. All of you are here because you are leaders in your organization. So how do we relate that? How do we succession plan to be able to sustain our groups long term? So first of all, is succession planning necessary? In a nutshell, absolutely yes. It's something that we always need to be thinking about in our local organizations. So what does that mean? And I know there's a lot of words here, but I wanted to make sure that you captured all of this and took that with you. So when we think about that succession planning, it's just going to be that process for identifying and developing our people from within our local organizations that have that potential and specific skill set to be able to perpetuate our organization into the future. Basically, what we're doing is increasing the availability of our volunteers like yourself. That way you can continue to grow into leadership roles through your organizations. So that last comment there, replacement planning, that is going to be very key for the heart of succession planning. We can't have the same people serving in the same roles time after time, year after year, right? We always need to be able to bring new people to the table. We need to be able to empower our new interns that are coming into our group. And that's kind of what I liken it to this here as our pipeline. If any one part of that pipeline burst, then we have a major kink in the system, right? So that's just kind of how I guess I can compare leadership at the local level to be able to, again, continue to build our state organization as a whole. So who are these key leaders when we talk about leadership? Well, that, of course, is going to be you. You are here, again, because you are serving in some kind of key leadership role within your local associations or organization. But let's not forget our project leaders or our project chairs, any of our committee chairs. All of those are going to be important leadership and key roles within our organization. So think about your current local association board, your leadership team, your executive team, whatever y'all call that. Just think internally what describes it best. Are 50% or more of your people serving a first or second term? Are more than 50%, have they already served more than 2 terms? Or more than 75% that have served more than 2 terms? And this is something we're not going to spend a lot of time on today, but I want you to think about it for our next visit, because we're going to build all this up to when we see one another in person in October, and we're going to bring back and revisit some of these key concepts. And this is going to play a critical role in that succession planning. So when we think about this leadership pipeline, we always have to think about the deficits as well. When we think about our leaders, you as leaders, our members back home in our counties at our local level, we don't want to become stagnant, do we? We don't want to get stale as a leader. We don't want to become stagnant as an association. We don't want to always be maintaining the status quo. Just because it's always worked, we've always done it that way, doesn't mean that we need to continue in that same vein. You know, change is one of those things that's going to occur, but success is something that we kind of choose. You know what I'm saying? So we know that change is ongoing, but how are we going to relate and adapt to that? And again, when we relate that to our local association, you know, we've got to always be considering the long-term sustainability. We want to make sure that we're remaining viable, fingering out into the communities. We want to think about the time and the energy and the productivity that we as individual volunteers are spending, but then also what we're doing as an organization. You know, how much time and energy that we're spending. You know, how do those play into maintaining, again, the vigor of our local organization? So again, you kind of see here that same old thinking, you're going to yield the same old results, right? So sometimes it's good to, what Emily said to just a few minutes ago, some of our leaders think outside the box, allow that creativity to flow, think about your leadership and think about how you can groom new people or even people that have been within your organization for an extended period of time. How can you grow those to become leaders to help, again, forward your organization? And a quote that I've always, I use this quite a bit. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. So always consider that again, kind of keep that in the back of your mind as you think about the volunteer leadership pipeline. So again, you've heard Natalie and the entire team talk about this several times. Why do most people volunteer? People come for the plants, but they stay for the people, right? So when we look at that and kind of break that down, it's got to be to the individual a meaningful opportunity for you to serve in that capacity. Think about the locations within your local organizations, just being accessible to you. You don't want to be driving an hour to go to a volunteer opportunity, although I know some of you are doing that. Think about matching your skill set. And that's one of the things we'll talk about in our next couple of sessions, being able to match the individual's skill set with a specific project or committee or a leadership role. Projects that matter to you, you're going to be more involved with those projects that are going to bring you joy, that you feel like you're giving back, that are creating impact to your communities. And then, money. We don't receive money as a volunteer, but oftentimes those rewards, what Emily talked about a few minutes ago, are much more than the monetary value, but we're creating an economic value to our communities. So then in retrospect, why do some people not volunteer? Again, this kind of goes back to what Emily said, introvert versus extrovert. Again, this is something we'll explore in our next session, but some folks actually want to be asked personally to become a volunteer, to join the local association or the program. Not everyone is going to react the same way. Not everyone's going to be, have the same style. So some people actually want that little one-on-one kind of special invite. Some folks won't volunteer because there's no communication in place. This is something we'll really pound on at our October meeting. How do we keep communication transparent? How do we keep it flowing? Oftentimes over communication can be just as much as I guess, as an impediment as lack of communication, but it's finding that balance, and sometimes initially maybe over communication is going to be a little bit better. But again, it's just finding the balance between that. Again, some folks are not going to volunteer because it's not meaningful to them. So that's why as a leadership team or executive team or as a board, you've got to consider every person, every individual volunteer in your organization. How can you make it meaningful for everyone? We have that mission and vision that guides us, but also at the local level, it's your association, your people. How are you going to, bring everyone to the table to, so it's meaningful to everyone, not just the communities, but the individual volunteers. Some folks won't volunteer because of the lack of follow through. You've got to have consistency and a cohesiveness to be able to follow through. When you start something, you have to finish that. And that's something, again, we'll talk about a little bit later. And again, money comes back into it why people don't volunteer. They maybe don't have the resources or time to be able to commit to some of these projects and things like that. So again, when we think about those leadership roles, if we've got the same people serving in the same capacity year after year, it brings us back to what we just talked about. You get stagnant, you get stale, you maybe get a little bit bored. You're just kind of maintaining, you're just floating along. You're not really enhancing the local organizational culture. So think about this, and Emily spent a lot of time talking about leadership, but the first responsibility of a leader is to develop a person to replace them. The leader should identify 4 prospects. Identify 4 because on average, you're always going to have one that's going to refuse flat out. You're going to have one that's kind of going to disappoint you. They're going to say, yeah, they're going to do it, but then there's no follow through. You're going to have one that maybe packs up and moves to another state, joins another association, gone from your local organization, but then you'll have that one that will accept and they'll have that follow through. So always identify 4. If you're sitting in a president role, or if you're sitting in the chair, a project chair role, think about who you're going to groom. Always have 4 people you're kind of thinking about to assume that role when you're gone, because again, it's maintaining that leadership pipeline, right? We don't want to just all of a sudden have, 1 or 2 people out in front and that person drops off, and then who's going to be able to pick that up? If you've got a good pipeline of folks that are always coming through, then you're always going to be able to maintain the integrity of your local association. You're basically pulling other people up, other volunteers up. Again, this is where it's great to be able to bring that new intern class in this year. Really empower them to take the role right out of the gate, some kind of leadership role. I know within our Big Spring Master Gardener Association, we elect a intern representative every year to sit on our leadership team. And that individual also shadows the current hospitality chair and becomes the hospitality chair the next year. So they'll be planning all of our events and maintaining individual roles within the membership. That's just a really good way to empower not only that one individual intern, but also that entire intern class, because they have a voice, they have a say at the table of the leadership team. So here's another analogy, our Tennessee Smart Yards, the right plant, right place, right? Very important core concept. We'll relate that to our leadership pipeline. You take the right skill set, the right people, that's where we get succession leadership. A lot of people get a little bit nervous about the whole pipeline because maybe you don't always have volunteers that are willing to step up into roles. But again, that goes back to you as a leadership team or executive board need to be grooming other volunteers to follow in your footsteps. Again, that just helps create a cohesive and consistent flow with the local organization. So a few key components I want to talk about. And this one is one that makes everyone nervous, strategic planning. Everybody hears those two words and they want to run for the hills. But I promise you, it's a really good process to go through because you are developing a plan for your local organization with the input of all volunteers. Everyone has the chance to be heard. It's the time to gather around the table and be able to identify the skills to achieve the local mission and scope. Again, everyone is taking ownership. Hopefully this is a process that everyone comes together. You don't have, the little snarky comments. Everyone comes together. You plan on this together. That's why it's called strategic planning. You're defining any resources that you are going to need to be able to get you through the next 3 to 5 year plan, whatever you're planning for. And it's also an opportunity to be able to attract new volunteers. Put that plan in place, but don't forget your current membership either. You want to be able to retain and inspire those current volunteers as well. So when I talk about strategic planning, I'm always kind of likening that to a roadmap because it really is a roadmap to serve your local organization. Again, you're bringing all your folks to the table. Everyone has a voice. Everyone has a say in how you're going to have that future direction of your local organization. And remember that even though we're talking about this at the local level, all of this feeds up to our state organization as well, because we can't have a healthy and successful state organization without individual volunteers like you and our local group associations. So again, it's just mapping the future, being able to retain our current volunteers and recruit for the future. Second thing is valuing volunteers. Emily spent some time talking about this. We want to be able to recognize and value the skill sets of our individual volunteers. We want to include them in planning and programming. Again, it's about empowering and letting everyone be heard. We want to be able to honor our volunteers, recognize and reward those achievements. A lot of different ways that we can do that in our local organizations. We want to develop or create a culture. You've heard our team talk about this a lot, creating a culture where everyone can thrive, building that foundation of trust. Learning to be inclusive. We don't want to be exclusive. Look at that statement there. Internal environments determine how welcome current and potential volunteers feel. And there's a big distinction there. Emily talked about that a little bit between the thinking and feeling concept on the Myers-Briggs. That's something we'll explore in a later class. But we always need to be considering those internal environments because it's going to affect everyone. So we've got to look out for the entire local group culture. And sometimes you're going to have highs and lows. You're going to have ups and downs, but it's overall creating that culture where everyone, again, thrives. And then communicating and promoting, we just want to be able to always push our organization, what we're doing out into the community, focus on our volunteers, focus on our projects, communicate that to the local communities, to your stakeholders. Do that frequently. Also forming networks and partnerships. That's why you're here. We want you to come together as a state organization, as a group. That networking is very critical. Some of the best ideas you're going to learn from one another. And that's really good to be able to branch outside of your local organization to do that. And again, just being able to communicate effectively amongst your group, your volunteers, making sure that you're creating and managing really lively programs, because again, that's what's going to keep your volunteers engaged. And then encourage challenges and leadership opportunities. That's a big one. We want people to want to fill these roles, not, having to beg people to come in to be a project chair or to beg people to serve in a leadership role. It should be that people want to serve in that capacity. It goes back to what Emily said, that servant leadership. We're all that as Master Gardener volunteers and agents coordinating the program. So let's really, strengthen our volunteers to and empower them to want to serve in those leadership capacities. Of course, when we talk about communicating, we know all kinds of ways that we can do that. You see all of those pictured here. And of course, we still have, I guess you would say, the old mechanisms in place, the newspapers, the radio, and the TV as well. Just to always be sharing what your group is doing. And remember, your network, that's ultimately your net worth. Remember that when we think about the leadership pipeline, it's basically putting the puzzle pieces together. You've got a big jigsaw puzzle, and you're just ultimately putting that together piece by piece. Effective communication is going to be one of the most important ways to accomplish this goal. And then leadership is going to mean facing those challenges head on. You've heard Emily again talk about that quite a bit this morning. And those leadership roles, just a few things I want to talk about before we jump into some group discussion. When we think about our vice president or president-elect, however you term that, that's an individual that you really need to consider years kind of out down the road, because that individual, you need to groom them to come into that president role. When you're letting that president-elect or vice president shadow the current leadership, it just gives them that opportunity again to grow and to be a better leader serving in that capacity. And again, these are things we don't want to be begging our people to do. We want them to want to step into that capacity. A lot of times people look at that VP or president-elect role as, I'm just a placeholder, but I'm not really doing much. You're eventually going to grow into that position to lead your local organization, and that's very important. Another role is our past chair or past president. Don't overlook this individual or these individuals, because they're very, very valuable. They've served in that capacity. They can really help guide the process for the organization. And then I'll just kind of leave you with this little cartoon before we jump into our group discussions. What? I'm vice president? That means I have to be president next? And then, yeah, that'd be you. And just don't forget your past president. And remember, when we select officers, do you choose them on skill, knowledge, or competency, or are you choosing them on popularity and willingness to serve? We don't want people just to say, oh, I'll do it since nobody else is going to do it. That's not really good for the long-term success, right, of our local organizations. We really want to grow our organizations to where people, again, want to serve in that capacity, because again, when you take on that role, you're assisting your local organization to grow and sustain itself long term, and that's ultimately what we want to do. So what we are going to do now, Emily and I, this is primarily Emily, has put these questions together, and we want to bust y'all out into some groups, and we will actually post these in the chat box so you can see these, but we're dividing you into 4 groups. So group 1, you're going to answer question 1. Natalie, how are we on time? Are we good? I can't see my clock.
Yeah, we've got 15 minutes, so we're good.
Okay. All right, super. So we got you into 4 groups. So group 1, you're going to answer or discuss group or question 1, and we're going to let you go for about 7-8 minutes, and then we're going to bring you back so you can share what your group discussed on each one of these. I put 10 minutes down here, but if we've only got 15 minutes, we want you to have ample time to be able to share. So give us a few minutes, and we're going to post those into the chat box, and I am going to open up chat rooms now. So if you will, whatever you've been assigned to, just join that group, and you'll see Emily and myself or Natalie coming around to make sure you get your questions. Just look in the chat box for those.
Okay.
Let's not waste any time. Group 1, anybody want to share from group 1 what you chatted about in your session? How do you describe your ideal teamwork environment?
I think one of the things that some of us didn't know was the position of member at large that some of the groups have, and it's a great idea. I would love to see it in ours, and why that's such a key position to keep everyone focused and be able to submit concerns sort of anonymously. and be able
Right.
to keep everybody on track and not have to worry about personality conflicts that would keep people from speaking out.
All right. Thanks, Dawn. Anybody else from group 1 want to share? All right, group 2. In what ways can both introverts and introverts contribute to our mission?
All right. Well, they had lots and lots of great ideas. So while they were self-proclaimed, many of them introverts, I think they did a great job at extrovert telling and discussing. So, they were just putting all the things together that you and Emily kind of had told us about and seeing how those can work together in the context of all the different types of projects that our associations have, right? So, yes, we are going to need those detail-oriented, maybe introvert, more on the introvert side types of folks. They also felt like they were better at listening and noticing others' qualities and seeing maybe where they would fit in really well in different service areas as far as projects were concerned. Another one that I thought was really cool that they pointed out was they were feeling like introverts that they knew tended to be more like technology, like savvy, and loved research and reading and diving into the details and minutia. And then we thought it'd be cool. What if we could intentionally pair up introverts with an extrovert who can help that introvert be more comfortable in these public settings for presenting, right? So we've got the extrovert who's really good at getting out there, mixing and mingling, no reserves on presenting. The other side of it where we've got some really good research. What if we could pair those together and make a super team? I thought that was one of the coolest things that came out of their discussions.
Very good, team 2. All right, team 3. What are some benefits of extrovert and introvert in leadership positions? Did y'all have some thoughts on that?
Yep. So me and Anna, we were in there with group 3, and we had a lot of great discussion about, the importance of balancing the introvert versus the extroverted qualities and how both are very important to all the different positions. And so one type of personality could be a great fit for a, position on the board or committee lead, this and that. So basically, we just talked about how all of them can fit in somewhere and bring a new dynamic and important perspective to help better the group at large.
Awesome. Thanks, team 3. All right, group 4. How is your Master Gardener group providing leadership opportunities for both introverted and extroverted leaders? Could you be doing something different? You're the only one I see. I don't see Kathy.
Yeah, my picture's right up next to yours. So, okay. Didn't take notes. Let's see. We talked about, well, trying to find out who's an introvert and extrovert, but also I think what we talked about a lot was the perceived amount of work that leaders do and that people are discouraged, especially an introvert, seeing how much a leader does. That may discourage them from trying to step forward or actually stepping forward and taking a role. And I think that was the main thing. I don't know if anybody else got anything else out of that. But it was mainly just the perceived workload was really off-putting for a lot of people. And it could be more for an introvert than an extrovert.
And they brought up another good point about some people take on a role and hold it maybe for too long and it becomes their identity and they have trouble letting go of it. And so making sure that we have those kind of connections where we can, like you said, groom people to take over new positions and new roles where it doesn't become one person's identity, it's the whole group. It's not my project, it's our project.
All right, great, y'all. Great job. I know we're right at time, so I don't want to keep us on here any longer, but I just want you to know that the feedback from your discussion groups today, that'll help Emily and I kind of move forward for our next session. We're just going to continue to build on what we talked about today and continue to kind of build some of those foundational skills, especially when we get together face to face in October. So we'll have a lot of fun things for you to do throughout the remainder of the year. So just stay tuned for that. And we really appreciate and value your input and jumping on here and being with us today. So with that, we're going to close this out and we will see you next time. Y'all have a great weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
See you soon.
Thanks.